Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my mixed bin of red worms, or bin of mixed red worms. That might be the better way to think about it. And we've been doing something a little bit interesting in that system, which is a ping-pong style of feeding, going from one side of the bin to the other. So this rectangular box represents the bin, and the two columns on left and right indicate the feedings that we've been giving these little guys. I had a printout similar to this last time too, which was just included as a top covering piece of paper. I do believe under the plastic I could sort of see traces of it there. So perhaps the worms haven't quite done away with it yet. That's okay. We'll use it as supplementary bedding in their feeding. And guess what? They're getting a nice new one today. So we'll take a closer look at this together. Let's get this thing up on the bench and get them fed. If you looked really close, you might have noticed the feeding that they're getting today is number 10, and it consists of pumpkin, which is not really going to be a slow composting food item. It's this other thing that you see here. It's the skin and the pit of avocado. Those things will definitely take some time. So even though the pumpkin might get scratched off during a check-in not so far in the future, we'll most likely be seeing those pits and peels for a little while longer. So that means we're feeding on this side. Our last feeding on that side was also pumpkin, but it included a stem. So even if the pumpkin's not gone today, after 12 days since the last check-in, we can almost be guaranteed that the stem will be sitting there waiting for us. Man, look at that cavitation of the feeding zone from last time. Man, they've really done a number on it. And here's like the old diagram from last time. Most of the ink from it has, well, no, not really. Some of it has faded a little bit. Most of it's quite legible, especially the black writing here. So you can see even here, when I came down last time, TBD was all we had on the printout because I didn't know yet what I'd be feeding them when I prepared the diagram. But today I already had the food down here, and then I ran upstairs and prepared the diagram. We knew exactly what they were getting for this meal on this occasion. So this was where we last fed. So before we open up the other side and apply today's feeding, let's just check out how that last feeding from 12 days ago went. My guess is only the stem remains. We must have not had anything here in the middle because it's really kind of standing out. I see some newspaper. Some newspaper must have been included as foundational bedding when we last fed. Man, is there a lot of moisture in here. And I see a lot of leftover pumpkin. Interesting. We never know quite what to expect as far as the faster moving items. The slow moving items, obviously, stems. I believe stems might have, let's see, where was stems? Stems, pepper stems, banana stems. Those things are from 34 days ago, almost 5 weeks ago. Some of them still holding out pretty good. Although, you know, it's very showy in terms of, hey, it looks like it's quite intact, but the inside of it is completely hollowed out. So the worms have just gobbled everything soft on that thing away, and it seems like only the outer, more fibrous portion of it remains. Here too, same story, perhaps not quite as far along, but definitely also seems to have the attention of the worms. And here's some more pumpkin stem. I just don't remember if there was another pumpkin stem going even further back. Yeah, there was a 59-day one, plus now a 12-day one. You could tell right away. This one's got to be the 59-day-old one. Doesn't have any of its green color remaining or any of its fleshy pumpkin veggie matter remaining on it. So that's kind of cool that we've got a counter, a day counter, to tell us exactly how old any of those objects are on the day that we check in on them. So no, the focus wasn't meant to be this side of the bin or this feeding, but it is always curious to see how the feeding from the previous check-in, in this case 12 days ago, is progressing. And I guess it was also kind of interesting to see how damp things are over on this side of the bin. I wonder if we might have predicted it when we put the pumpkin in, because the pumpkin does bring with it a good bit of moisture. Even this stuff is still frozen solid, but once it thaws, it's going to release a great deal of its moisture. So the whole idea here is to return all this stuff that we just excavated back down into the feeding zone. I just somehow wish we could dry things off here a little bit. A little bit of dry bedding might be nice, actually, if you ask me. So perhaps we'll just do one little cheat here, and we'll add a little bit of extra bedding. No food to be tracked on this side. No, so yeah, here's the repair I just did on my my prepared bedding storage bin. It hit the ground the other day and broke a few chunks of plastic away. One piece of the plastic I just didn't really locate, so there's a little hole in there which has been covered up by some clear tape. And now it sort of continues as a fairly moisture tight container, while that side of it had a big hole in it and was like kind of ventilating over there. It seems like our bedding has become a bit drier than it normally would be in that container due to the airflow that was coming and going through it, but I just fixed it today, so hopefully from this point forward it'll do a much better job hanging on to its moisture content. So I guess anything to me that seems like pumpkin or stems of anything, all of that seemed like it belonged right back over here in the feeding zone from last time. And wait, did we forget a whole chunk of something? We did, didn't we? This belongs there too. Gosh. Have I mentioned recently how much of an airhead I am? I think I did. I think it was actually one of the things I said in the most recent video yesterday. So I must have done a real airhead move there too. And not too surprising that I'm continuing my airhead antics here, but hopefully we've managed to now return everything that belongs on that side of the bin into the feeding area, get it submerged, at least to some degree. And look at this huge stem. Get it back down in there. Let it continue. As for this moisture, though, you know, I mean, what do I do with it? Do I let it remain this damp? Ugh. Kind of makes me feel like switching from that big pink plastic bag that covers this system. Perhaps switching over to some bubble wrap, which would allow for a little bit of moisture release around the edges. But for the most part, keep the moisture content of the system pretty high, not allow for too much moisture loss due to evaporation. Alright, last time we might not have even looked into the center of the bin, so today I'm glad I kind of felt like I had a reason to go in there, because I wanted to just cover up our last feeding zone pretty thoroughly, and now we've definitely got sufficient material to cover up with nicely. Maybe we'll use some of that again after we create an opening to add today's feeding and plop it in there. And I wouldn't want to see things get much more damp over here, because guess what, they're getting more pumpkin today, stuff that's going to most likely release some of its moisture into the surrounding materials, and there's already more than enough moisture in here. Really quick, let's just take a look what was in here. So one of the things was these weird spherical pieces of corn cob. Worms always manage to find the hole in the middle of the corn cob and go in there to feast on that thing, because the middle section, I believe, is a little bit softer than the rest of the corn cob. So they're just going for what is readily edible. And sometimes you just start bumping into stuff that you can't really remember what the heck it was. So that's pretty neat, whatever that is. Sometimes I feel tempted to go back and review the video from last time just to refresh my memory on what things were, in case this Brussels sprout, could that be Brussels sprout? Brussels sprout from 80 days is listed, but it's already been crossed off as if it was consumed and gone. But maybe we underestimated Brussels sprout. Maybe I just wasn't being very thorough, but here's something else that looks quite similar, so it is quite possible that what we're seeing here is 80-day-old Brussels sprout, not Brussels sprout, asparagus. Did I say asparagus? I Brussels sprout, I'm sorry. I thought I saw asparagus. Maybe that's not what this is. I do not recall. Alright. I can find myself getting into these little sort of search out the old food scraps distraction, getting into it, but we don't want to spend too much time on the old stuff. It's cool if we bump into something, and it's great to have a reference to tell us how old that object is. It was even kind of cool to run into two of those little spheres of corn cob. But I think we're ready to apply today's feeding. This stuff that had been out on the surface, the old diagram here on bleached out white paper, as well as some other stuff here. Some newspaper that must have been laid out as top covering. These things will go in nicely as a foundation for today's feeding. And before we put it all in there, why don't we, I think this thing too, right? This lime perhaps should be also listed because it'll probably be a slow going item. But let's use a little bit of my prepared bedding too before we drop in the feeding, because it does seem like the system could benefit from something that perhaps isn't quite as damp. I mean, my prepared bedding does have moisture content, but like I said earlier, my container in which I keep that stuff has been airing out and allowing its contents to become a little bit dry. So perhaps at the present time my prepared bedding isn't as damp as it normally would be. And it's going to be plenty damp as soon as this pumpkin here begins to emit its moisture content, because there's a lot of juice caught up in this stuff, if you ask me. And then perhaps these things that are expected to take a little bit longer, the slower composting items, can just be spread out over there in the middle for easy access the next time. So before we cover up entirely, let's give them a little bit of my grit, crushed eggshell, to help with the digestion of the foods that they're getting. And I've also got this yummy worm chow to include as well. Hopefully they appreciate it. So that's it for our check-in, I believe. We've pretty much thoroughly gone through the entire system. It's really just a matter of covering up. But I think we went a little overboard over here as far as stacking up some of this material. We can definitely bring some of this back, I believe, to create a nice thorough covering of today's delicious pumpkin meal with a few other things mixed in there. And yeah, we've got way too much moisture going on here. I'm sure the worms love it. And you know, for how old are we now? For a 104-day-old system, perhaps it is better just to leave it be. We're coming in regularly enough and aerating. Nothing's going to go anaerobic here, I don't think. So you know what? Why don't we leave it as it was? We'll cover up again, perhaps no larger size, like a newspaper top covering like I think we had previously. Perhaps this time we just go with the feeding zone indicator as well as our diagram on top and see how they take to that. I mean, they didn't really do too much with the diagram from last time, from 12 days ago. There were some holes in it. Large parts of it still remained. But now there's no newspaper to distract them. Maybe they'll take a bigger bite out of it between now and the next time we check in on these guys. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.